The first reading this morning is one of my favorite poems by the poet Sarah Frelig. It's called Wondrous. And it's about things that can take you out of the present moment and make you remember something else. She's also drawing in this on the author E.B. White and her mother, hearing a tenderness and claiming a tenderness from both of them. Wondrous. I'm driving home from school when the radio talk turns to E.B. White, his birthday. And I exit the here and now of the freeway at rush hour, travel back into the past, where my mother is reading to my sister Emily the part about Charlotte laying her eggs and dying. And though this is the 5th time Charlotte has died, my mother is crying again, and we're laughing at her because we know nothing of loss and its sad math, how every subtraction is exponential, how each grief multiplies the one preceding it, how the author tried 17 times to record the words, "She died alone," without crying. 17 times, 17 takes, and a short walk, during which he called himself ridiculous, a grown man crying for a spider he'd spun out of the silk thread of invention. Wondrous how those words would come back and make him cry. And yes, wondrous to hear my mother's voice 10 years after the day she died. The catch, the rasp, the gathering up before she could say to us, "I'm okay." Love it. The Bible reading, the one I chose today, was the Hebrew scripture. It's a little bit of a long one. 2 Kings chapter 2. It's about the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way to Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." There's a scene I can only barely remember in the what do you call the what's the J.R.R. Tolkien thing? The Ring, Lord of the Rings, where Samwise Gamgee is saying to his friend, I have to take care of this alone. And Bilbo says to Samwise Gamgee, "I have to take care of this alone." And Sam says, you're right, Frodo." There we go, Frodo. There we go, thank you. I'm a different kind of nerd, is all. And Frodo says, "I have to do this alone." And Samwise says, "You will, and I'm going with you." I like that. Anyway, this is what Elisha makes me think of. "I'm going with you. I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elijah and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." And Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." And Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me on to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went, this time stood off at a distance from them, as they were both standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle, and he slapped it on the water. The water was parted on one side and the other, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Okay, that's not there. I just feel like there's an okay. Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He's calling himself the firstborn child of this prophet. And he said, "You've asked a hard thing, but if you see me as I am taken up from you, it will be granted to you. If not, then it will not. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elijah kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen!" But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. He picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen on the ground, fallen from him. He went back and he stood by the banks of the Jordan. He took that mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and he struck the water and he said, "Where is the God of Elijah? Where? Where?" He struck the water again and the water parted on the one side and the other, and Elisha crossed over. Karen, I'm sorry, I could see you backing up there. This is the story of God. I like that one because it's dramatic. Some of you know that in a previous life, I worked as a hospice care social worker. Previous life, I mean in my 20s. It feels like a previous life. It was rewarding work, but it was also kind of weird. Not weird because I was spending my work days with people who were dying and with their families, but weird because doing that put on display just how ill-prepared we are, so many of us, to think about the realities of death and of grief. I can't tell you how many times my colleagues or I had experiences where we would meet with a family ahead of time, and they would tell us something like, "Maybe don't tell Dad that you're with hospice, because we don't want him to know that he's dying. He'll feel hopeless." And then we would go in and sit with Dad for a while, and Dad would say, "Don't tell my family that I'm dying. I don't want them to be too sad." Which helped me know what my job was going to be then, was to help them talk with each other. There's a little bit of that dynamic in the Bible reading today. Elijah and Elisha, they were both prophets in a turbulent time of the Israel that's written about in the scriptures. A nation had been briefly united under King David and under his son Solomon, and then it fractured into two. Israel and Judah. Elijah was a prophet, which meant his job was to be a thorn in the side of unrighteous rulers. And he had explicitly chosen Elisha to be his successor in that. God told him to do this. And yet, as he faced death at the end of this story, at this point in the story, Elijah kept trying to run away from his protege. Okay, so the story calls it being taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. But whatever you call it, being removed from the world that you know is death for you and for the people who are left behind. For all intents and purposes, this is death, whatever the story calls it. So, 3 times Elijah says to Elisha, "You stay here. God has called me to that town over there." The part he doesn't say out loud is, "So I can die." And 3 times, Elisha says, "Oh, no, you don't. I'm going with you." This story cracks me up. He's like the younger sibling who will not leave you alone. It gave me flashbacks to my own adolescence when my brother and I were with a friend and we were trying to misbehave. Eli, remember I told you this is imaginary. We were just experimenting with language like "dang it." I won't tell you what we were doing because my dad is on Zoom and I don't want to get grounded. The friend had a little brother. All we wanted to do was have a little adolescent fun that adults would have disapproved of, but that little brother would not leave us alone, which, all things considered, was probably not the worst thing to have happened. But it was infuriating in the moment. And here's Elijah, just wanting to die. I mean, be taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. In peace. Don't tell my family. I don't want them to be too sad. But Elisha absolutely insisted on tagging along. And then in the first two places, groups of other prophets come out to tell him on his own, not in front of Elijah apparently, hey, did you know he's going to die? He's going to be taken from you. And both times he says, yes, I know, keep quiet, which I think in the original Hebrew is something like, I know, shut up. There's so much pathos in this story. It cracks me up. It also moves me. The portrayal of grief is so deeply human. As Elijah is whisked away, Elisha calls out for the one person who means the most to him, the one person he wants to have hear him, the one person he wants to tell about this thing he's seeing, who also happens to be the person who's not going to hear him. It's no longer accessible to him. Elijah's mantle, like a stole is how I imagine it, falls to the earth, the symbol of his prophetic authority. Elisha picks it up. He takes it back to the last place he saw Elijah use it and does what he saw Elijah do. But his anger, the anger that comes along with grief sometimes, is palpable. Did you hear it? Slapping the mantle down on the river's surface twice and yelling out, "Where is Elijah's God? Where?" Like a challenge. Where? The grief is so raw. And then the water parts, and he feels the same spiritual power that flowed through his mentor, flowing through him now. That, I think, is the most powerful part of the story. Which, don't get me wrong, these were both Iron Age prophets, and in the Iron Age there was a different sense of what the most important things were. So the first thing Elisha does after feeling that prophetic power is to clean the water supply of a town. So far, so good. But the very next story is about a bunch of little kids, small boys, it says, who come out and start jeering him. Go on up, y'all, bald head. Get out of here, bald head. And he curses them in the name of the Lord, and 2 bears come out and maul 42 of them. Just say it. Just say it. The Bible's got some weird stories. It does. But the emotional and the spiritual core of this story is about grief. Experiencing it, acting it out, and channeling it into something powerful. Y'all who've been around have heard me quote from Nick Cave a time or two by now. Formerly self-destructive rock and roll wild child, who self and other destructive, who's turned into a very thoughtful rock and roll elder. In his online Red Hand Files forum this week, he posted a question from a fan who wrote to say, "The shows I've seen lately have been really intense. How do you prepare for those?" I thought his reply was really lovely. He runs through a litany of people he's lost. He says, "I sit in silence with my eyes closed for about 15 minutes. During this time, I bring to mind those dear to me who have passed away, focusing on each person individually and silently solicit their presence. For someone of my age, this is a fairly substantial task. I assign specific qualities or powers to them that reflect their personalities, and I call upon those qualities. I call on Arthur, his youngest son who died tragically at 15. I call on Arthur, for example, for his joyfulness. Jethro, who's another of his sons who died tragically of a drug overdose. Jethro for his anarchic spirit. My mother for her courage. My father for his dynamism. I also look to my old friend Mick Geyer for his diligence. Tracy Pugh Shane and Conway, other musicians, for their subversiveness, disorder, and wicked humor. I call upon Anita for her pure creativity, Roland for his extraordinary inventiveness, and so forth. I appeal to these individuals and many more, much like a devout person might petition the saints for assistance. I remember all these people, and I feel a deep spiritual empowerment, so that when I take to the stage, I am carried along by this unearthly fraternity and their special powers. For me, this is an immense strength, an energy that illuminates what is important and what is not. He likens it to petitioning the saints. A number of indigenous cultures would name it calling on the ancestors. Whatever you call it, notice the life-giving power that comes from remembering those who have died. For Nick Cave, it's about getting ready for live performances. But I wonder whether there's something we can take from that that's more broadly applicable. After all, the question was specifically about how he prepares for the intensity of live shows. And life itself is pretty intense these days. I have a hard time making it all the way through the front section of the newspaper in the morning. Every day brings fresh horrors. The daily murders in Gaza of people who are just trying to get food. The string of abductions by our homegrown Gestapo. The constant attempts by the rich to keep gaming the systems that allow them to legally steal money, food, and health care from the poor. If you can't make up your mind from one moment to the next whether you feel rage, hopelessness, or paralysis, you're not alone. Those feelings, like grief, are normal. They're part of our human inheritance. But they're not our endpoints. They're not destinations. So I'm going to invite you now to spend a few moments as Elisha, picking up the mantle of his mentor, or as the writer of the Christian Testament book of Hebrews, calling on a great cloud of witnesses, or as Nick Cave getting ready to go on stage and calling on his loved ones. Call to mind one of your heroes. It might be someone you're related to. Maybe a parent or a grandparent, a great-grandparent, somebody farther back than that. Somebody you've got a story about that you admire. Or maybe it's someone who mentored you, or maybe it's somebody you're not connected to at all, except that they made an impact on the world that is important. If you can picture their face, do that. What's the look in their eyes? Is there a smile playing across the corners of their mouth? Are their lips pressed tight with resolve? Are their hands open or closed? Can you hear their voice, even if you've never actually heard it? Just hold that person in your mind and think of a characteristic that they possessed that you need now, that this world needs now. And I'm going to give us the next several moments in silence. Remember to breathe, but picture that person. Envision that characteristic that you need, and imagine it flowing from them into you. now, whoever that was, whatever it was that you called forth from them, slap it on the water and let's walk into something new. That's where God's good news is. Amen.